All right. As you know, this is for our year-end Reinvent Rhode Island project. We're talking to a dozen of the movers and shakers in Rhode Island about what they'll do to fix the economy in the coming year. Obviously, you've accomplished a lot in 2 years as treasurer, and we'll want to talk about that at some point. And obviously, there's speculation about what your future may hold and what role you might play in the state's economy then, and we'll talk about that at some point. But the thing we really want to focus on is this coming year, and what will you do as treasurer to help improve the state's economy. So we'll just throw that out open-ended and then discuss the specifics as we go along.
A few things. One thing, as you know, is I've launched an initiative called Empower RI, which we launched about a month ago, and will really develop next year. And that's all about, that's kind of a grassroots, bottoms-up economic development initiative, which we've talked about. It's aimed at helping people get on a budget, stay on a budget, get out of debt, get into the right mortgage. Fundamentally, in order to have a strong economy, you need people and families who are financially secure. And so this is a program that we're really going to look to blow out. It's already in high schools. We're already in about 40 high schools, and I think we're going to look to expand that next year. We've launched the Financial Coaching Corps. We are calling on employers in Rhode Island to sign up for the Financial Coaching Corps. I hope many employers will do that. Really, again, my general theme is kind of fixing the fundamentals. So we've got to have people who are financially literate and in good, strong financial, stable situations. So that's one big initiative. The other thing, as you know, Paul, is I've been very involved in getting the Pew Foundation to fund effort for technical assistance for municipalities. Rhode Island's economy isn't going to thrive unless we fix the big issues. And pension debt is a barrier to economic growth. We fixed it on the state level, and that's a huge step forward for economic development. Municipalities have to do the same thing. And so I've been working with them. We've got Pew in here to fund it. I think it's an innovative approach to solve that problem by having a foundation pay for the technical assistance. We just got to keep going. As treasurer, I got to keep working with these municipalities to get them to fix their fundamentals. And then, continuing to defend the pension lawsuit. It is vital for the state's economy that the legislation stands. I don't think you can have a thriving economy in Rhode Island if that legislation is struck down.
Paul, okay, if I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
The Pew Foundation Technical Assistance Program, how does that work exactly?
So the Pew Foundation, it's actually, if I could take a minute. So we can continue to hear from municipalities. We want to do the right thing. We want to fix our pensions. We want to fix our health care benefits. But most municipalities don't have the resources. They might have one part-time or maybe full-time finance person, and they said to us, we need help. So the Pew Foundation has agreed to pay for a team of experts that includes an actuary, a restructuring expert, a lawyer, and I think a contract negotiations expert. And that team is going to municipalities. So we launched a program. The municipalities have to sign up for it, raise their hand and say, I want to do it. So Pawtucket's doing it, Coventry's doing it, a few other places are doing it. I can get you the full list. And they're saying, yeah, we want the help. Cumberland raised their hand, and then this team is going to go in and actually run the numbers for them, do the technical work, and help them figure out, okay, these are 3 ways you can solve your pension problem. These are 3 ways you can solve your health care problem.
How much is that?
How much is it going to cost?
Yeah.
I don't know what their budget is, although they originally started saying they'll take 5 cities and towns, and then we went back to them and said, if more than 5 want to do it, will you pay for it? And they said yes. So they chose Rhode Island because of what we did last year. And they said, hey, big things are happening in Rhode Island. We want to be there. It seems like you guys are committed to real change, so we'll put the money up if you're committed to real change.
You mentioned the pension lawsuit. Let's say sometime this year the unions prevail. What do you as treasurer do?
Well, we'll exhaust every possible appeal. So if they prevail at trial, we'll appeal to the Supreme Court. So, but you're saying
And the end of the
end
line,
of the
no more
road,
appeals.
Then I'm obliged to follow the law. We'd have to unwind. It's kind of a hard hypothetical to answer because it's so complicated. They might say this part of the law stands up, this part of the law gets struck down, you can keep doing this, but it's a little hard to answer. But like I say, we'll defend it vigorously, and then at the end we'll follow the law.
Well, do you just say that's it and not make more efforts? What do you do to fix the problem?
It's impossible to answer without knowing exactly what they decide, how they decided it. I don't know. It's like this whole interview could be about that. If they say, it depends what they find specifically and the grounds for what they found. So, if we think that there's a certain reform that we could then pass, that would pass muster under the new law, then obviously we would try to do that. It just kind of depends. But what I would say, this thing is about economic development. The primary thing about reinventing Rhode Island and moving the state forward, at its core, pension reform was about economic development. Absolutely about economic development. And since the day the General Assembly passed that legislation, Rhode Island has received a great deal of attention locally and nationally for being a leader among states as one of the few states that's actually tackling its tough fiscal issues. And that's the reputation we want. If you want to have businesses come to Rhode Island and stay in Rhode Island, that's what they want to see. They want to see a government that's willing to make tough choices and take obstacles to growth out of the way. And they also want predictability. One of the greatest things about the pension reform is its predictability in expenses. It's not just that we solved it for next year, we solved it for the next 20 years. So if you're a business thinking about being in Rhode Island, staying in Rhode Island, coming to Rhode Island, you have predictability around that pension cost for 20 years. Very few states can say that. Very few states. So it's really a huge competitive advantage for Rhode Island.
Now, the two answers you gave to what you'll be doing next year to help the economy is basically continue things that started in the past. Empower, I realize you're expanding it, but it's continuing that and defending the pension law. What else
and local pensions.
What else can you do as treasurer to improve the economy?
I think a couple things. The other thing that I should have mentioned, which is a continuation, but we've had some success. I've been personally involved in recruiting businesses to Rhode Island, and I think the treasurer certainly has a role to play there. So in one instance, maybe we talked about this, Paul, it was a company called Utilidata, and the pension fund, the pension system invested in a venture capital firm called Braemar, and then I developed a relationship with the principals of Braemar, and together we worked to get them to move a company called Utilidata from Washington State to Rhode Island. And that was, it was a great example of what I can do and what we have to do to get the economy around. We moved quickly, urgently. I personally met with the CEO. I personally met with the equity backers. We got them going quickly. So the other one was Tunstall, Brad Waugh's company, which is a call center company. I remember vividly, Brad called me on a Friday night because I had worked with him in the past, in my prior life in the venture capital business. And he said, Gina, I think there's an opportunity. We have to move quickly. 8 o'clock Monday morning, we had a meeting, and we were in motion. Immediately called the mayor of Pawtucket. Boom, boom, boom. I forget, a month or so later, he announces a couple hundred jobs coming to Pawtucket. So I'm going to continue to look to do things like that because I've done that. I spent a whole career building companies recruiting companies, especially in the healthcare industry. So whether it's using the pension assets and those relationships with the equity backers, or just leveraging my experience and background, like with Brad, telling medical device, great thing. You know, I'll be looking to draw on my medical device background to actually get companies or people to say, you ought to think about Rhode Island.
The two examples you cited seem to be kind of right place, right time. Do you see a formal programmatic role for the treasurer in bringing companies to Rhode Island?
Well, I think the Utilidata example is actually not right place, right time. I mean, that was it's like a focused effort to get to know the partner at the equity firm, to pitch him on Rhode Island. I'm still pitching him on Rhode Island. Maybe he'll do it again, bring another company here. So in that respect, I'm going to be more formal and aggressive around mining the relationships that the pension system has with banks and equity investors to say, put money to work in Rhode Island, like put capital to work in Rhode Island. I think we are also looking at other ways that, because we manage at $7.5 billion, and we have dozens of relationships with equity players that invest in companies. So I'm going to start to be more active, targeting those firms and saying to them, you ought to have a look in Rhode Island. Start a company in Rhode Island. Invest in a company in Rhode Island. Put a company in Rhode Island.
What does Utilidata do?
It's an IT company. They have a software technology that essentially, it's an energy efficiency software technology.
How many jobs does it do?
I think they're now, it's a startup company. I think they started with 6, and now they're up to maybe 20. But it's the kind of company that'll double in size every year.
Are they here already?
Yeah, they're in Providence. They were in Washington State, and we convinced them to move to Providence. And by the way, it wasn't that hard of a sell. I mean, I sat down with the CEO, and he was this is actually worth taking a second on. He was thinking about moving to North Carolina or to Route 128. And we sat down, and again, I know this pitch because this is what I used to do for a living. I said, if you look at the labor cost of Providence versus 128, what you pay an engineer, Providence is much less expensive. If you look at real estate in Providence, the cost versus Route 128, it's like half as much. Then he looked at the competitive environment of Route 128. You hire a guy there, and the next day other people are trying to steal him. So, and we are 2 hours from New York and 40 minutes from Boston. So he can access all the talent he wants in Boston, but pay the prices of Providence. So again, it really wasn't that hard of a sell. Cost of doing business is low, perfect location on the East Coast. But we went after it. I mean, we were pretty aggressive. We moved fast. That's what we got to do. Like, if you want to, I think in general, the way to resuscitate our economy is you need a sense of urgency.
Have there been other examples of that where people have heard about, for instance, pension reform in Rhode Island, and because of that have trickled into Rhode Island or coming here?
Not that I know of, although I'll tell you two things. We've talked about this. It was clearly reflected in our bond offering. We had probably the most successful bond offering the state's ever had because of pension reform, in large part. And that's not me talking, I met with the investors, and they were saying, wow, we want to own Rhode Island bonds. You guys are on the right track. As a result, taxpayers saved a lot of money because we didn't pay very much for the bonds, and that money is going to be used for building infrastructure in Rhode Island. I mean, you talk about the economy, we need skilled workforce and we need infrastructure. If you want infrastructure, you need to be able to borrow money. You need to be able to borrow money on favorable terms. And pension reform was 100% directly related to a successful bond offering at a good rate, and that's going to be money that's going to be put into higher education, all kinds of education, roads. That's going to make Rhode Island a more attractive place to do business. Anecdotally, I've talked to a lot of businesses in Rhode Island where they tell me they're discouraged and they're frustrated, but they say pension reform was a big boost and they're starting to believe again that we can do big things that the intractable problems are actually solvable. Now let's keep going.
Been a lot of talk about restructuring the EDC, or even, some people say do away with it and bring in a new structure.
Yeah.
Where should the treasurer fit into that, both the discussion and the solution?
It's a great question. I would say two things. I would say as a statewide officer, executive of the state, it is my concern. Every one of us should be waking up saying, what can we do to stimulate the economy? Having said that, the Treasurer's office is an office of limited jurisdiction with limited staff, limited authority, and I think it's important to respect the limits. So I've tried, pension reform, financial empowerment. I spent a ton of time on the road.
Let's back up to,
Yeah.
pension reform. The treasurer has no role in pension legislation, but you just drove
on.
that, and
True,
So-
but I
so-
had...
these
Sorry.
edges of the box you're describing seem a little artificial.
I'd say yes and no. I hear what you're saying, but I'm chairman of the retirement board. I had a fiduciary duty, and I was a fiduciary of a system that was 48% funded and running out of money. So it really was my obligation, I felt, to ring the bell. Plus, I administer the system, so
That was nice time.
Wow. Wow.
So-
I got that on tape.
So I am, squarely in the middle of it, and I have the resources. The treasurer hires and fires the actuary. The treasurer hires and fires legal counsel. So it really was like squarely in my wheelhouse. I believe economic development is the number one job of a governor. It is the governor's job to set an economic development vision and to marshal the resources of government behind that vision to make it happen. It's just the way it should work and the way government's structured for it to work.
What should the governor of Rhode Island be doing?
I think we need a plan. I think you need to sit down and say a couple things. You need to say, what are our obstacles to growth? And let's have a coherent plan to focus on a few things to remove obstacles and encourage growth. So, as I said, I'm of the view, jobs, we live in a globally competitive world. We can't turn the clock back on that, so we have to learn how to compete. We have to ask ourselves, where does Rhode Island have a competitive advantage? And in those I think there's a huge advantage in the medical device industry. I think we have an advantage in the food industry. I think we have an advantage in advanced manufacturing. Now, beyond that, you have to say, what do you need? Jobs are going to go, companies are going to go to places that have skilled workforce and infrastructure. You cannot have a skilled workforce if your public schools aren't performing and if your institutions of higher education aren't well funded and aren't performing. And you absolutely cannot recruit people if you don't have infrastructure. So I think you're going to say...
What do you mean by infrastructure? More than just roads? Or?
Our public schools are falling apart, literally, crumbling. Roads, public transportation. I was very active in the TF Green runway airport extension. And that's a classic example. There were very legitimate environmental concerns. There were not in my backyard concerns. I remember having a talk. I went to some of the hearings, and there was a woman that said, but there's a little league that my kids play at is going to get paved over. Totally legitimate. The fact of the matter is, for this state to thrive, we need a world-class airport. We need a world-class URI, Rhode Island College, and CCRI. So that's what I mean by infrastructure. Schools, roads, bridges, bandwidth, literally. I've spent time talking to businesses, especially on Aquidneck Island. They need internet bandwidth. So I think you need a plan. Someone needs to articulate a vision and a plan and just execute on it.
What's our advantage in medical devices and the food industry? Why is Rhode Island?
Well, medical device is an area I know a little bit about. They say enough to be dangerous, but because I spent 10 years as a medical device investor. So Rhode Island has a rich history of manufacturing. Because of RISD, we have preeminence in design. You know, great medical devices are all about design. Brown and URI have very strong engineering departments. Rhode Island Hospital, Care New England, Women and Infants is top 10 women's health hospital in the country. So we have basically the intellectual capital and the talent to do that. We're 45 minutes away from the Harvard medical system. I mean, the thing is, if you want to start a med device company, or if you were going to go to Johnson & Johnson and tell them, put your next 100 jobs in Rhode Island, they're going to want to know it's an inexpensive place to do business, and they have talent, and they have access to doctors, the top doctors who are going to experiment with their devices. We actually have all of that. You know,
so
we do.
Could you get on a plane and go talk to the CEO?
Yeah, and you know, certainly I think that's what economic development professionals would and should do. And like I was saying to Paul,
Will you?
Possibly.
In this coming year?
Maybe. I don't know. Joy's getting nervous.
Mhm.
But I think it's kind of what I was saying to you before. We have a lot of investments in equity firms. Some of those equity firms are medical device focused. I could easily see myself going to meet with some of those partners and saying, come to Rhode Island. You ought to put some money to work in Rhode Island. You ought to put a medical device company in Rhode Island. And making that pitch. I can make
It
that
seems
pitch
like
all
it's-
day
But what's the
long.
hesitation? I mean, why haven't you done it? Why won't you do it next week? You
I'm
seem to
thinking about
hesitate
it.
when I ask.
No, not really. I mean, like I said, I did it with Utilidata. There's no hesitation, really. It's just, you know, not necessarily easy. Like, everyone is competing for these businesses. So, but I think also as treasurer, I just have limited, like I said before, you know, authority. You know, these people want to know, like the work we did with Tunstile, it was a combined effort. You have to get EDC involved. The companies want to know the state is acting, you know, as one type of thing. But I think I will do some of it, and we'll see what happens.
How's your working relationship with the governor? I mean, do you
It's
guys
fine.
work the state as one?
Well, we worked very closely together during pension reform, and we still do work together.
That
Do you think
wasn't
the
a
governor should go on a plane and go advocate for specific companies to come to Rhode Island?
Yes.
Should you
Is
go
he
with
doing
him?
that now?
I'd be happy to go. If I can be of any value, I'd be happy to go.
Because really, it seems like a simple pitch. For all the reasons and all the advantages that you've already outlined, why aren't we doing that? Why don't we have people?
Well, I
go
hope
and
so.
say-
Another big opportunity we have is Route 195, which as treasurer I'm not at all involved in that and have no official role. But I have to believe that that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, that is a perfect plot of land to build any kind of healthcare industry. So I have to think that is what they're doing.
Shift focus a little. One of the things when you were running, you mentioned using the state's advantage as a large depositor to make some of these banks loosen up credit. We haven't seen anything happen. Fill us in.
It's a great question, and I did campaign on that, and I've tried to do it. But it turns out that a couple things. It turns out that they don't lack for cash. Their banks are experiencing unprecedented liquidity, you know, and this is in large part because of the national monetary policy, and the Fed is buying everything up. So these banks have, in like a normal time, that's a great thing, I think, for a treasurer to do. But when I got into office, I went and I met with the CEOs of all of the banks, or not the CEO of Bank of America, but senior people at Bank of America and the CEO of everything else, saying that. And it turns out they say, you know, look, we have more capital than we know what to do with. We've never been so flush with cash. We're not lending either because there's not enough opportunity or because we're just under more regulation. and we've become generally more risk averse. So we're still working on figuring out ways. One of the things we're thinking about now actually is as an add-on to the financial coaching core is providing that coaching to companies. Because what you hear from banks is we have the capital, but these guys aren't bankable. So if we can work with small businesses to help them become bankable and then kind of like send them to a bank and help to match them up, I think we'll be able to increase the
Is that
lending.
beyond the idea stage at this point, or you?
Is it beyond the? We haven't done it yet, but it's in. We're thinking about it.
What's bankable?
Worthy of getting a loan. So what we keep hearing, I spent actually a huge amount of time on this, trying to figure out how to solve the problem. Because you talk to businesses, especially small businesses, and they say we can't get a loan.
Right.
You talk to the banks, and they say we've got plenty of money.
Okay.
So we've been, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? So what I think what we keep hearing is the little businesses need to do a better job of packaging themselves, having their books together, clean set of books, good accountant, enough cash, building up a certain amount of cash, having an audit, the whole thing, and then relationships. So what I'm thinking is there a place for a program around helping them to get organized and then actually kind of bringing them to the bank so they get a fair look and a good look. So we'll try that. But it's not for lack of capital. But I will say, having said that, many banks have been great partners. I mean, the credit unions are being financial sponsors for EverFi, which is our program in high schools. We're working very closely with, one of the other things they came out against was payday lending, and I'll go back at that again this session. We've been working very closely with Navigant Credit Union and some other banks to provide payday loan alternatives. So, the banks have actually been, good community partners.
Some people, and this changing directions again, have cast gay marriage as an economic issue.
Yeah.
Do you see it as that?
I do. I believe it's a fundamental right. So I would be supportive of marriage equality even if it didn't have an economic benefit. Having said that, I do. It's a quality of life issue. It's a talent issue. We want the best talent here, regardless of your sexual orientation. We want to recruit people here, and it's a quality of life issue. And as you say, it speaks to quality of life. It speaks to protection of basic rights. So I think for the state, it is a good economic step forward.
Any of the businesses you've spoken with, has that come up as an
No.
issue?
No.
Going back to pensions, which we touched on earlier, describe how that is so important to the economy. That it's not, how does the state budget and the effect pensions have on it relate to the guy on Main Street in Pawtucket?
Yeah. You live in Pawtucket, don't you?
Yeah, not on Main Street though.
No. Gosh, so many ways. I mean, the guy on Main Street in Pawtucket might send his kids to public school, and in order for his kid to have a bright future, he needs to get a good education. And without pension reform, we won't have money to fund the schools. The guy on Main Street might then have a kid who wants to go to Rhode Island College. Rhode Island College is going to be the recipient of some of our bond financing. And so he deserves, and also their tuition should be affordable. Without pension reform, you won't have affordable tuition, and you won't have money going to Rhode Island College. The guy on Main Street pays property taxes, and probably can't afford to pay any more property taxes. Pawtucket and other cities might go bankrupt if we don't have pension reform. Absent pension reform, we send a bill to Providence of $13 million next year and another $13 million the next year. I don't know the number for Pawtucket, but it's probably not an exaggeration to say Pawtucket or other distressed cities would go bankrupt. So it's, we were talking before about how do you attract businesses to come here. Businesses do not want to come to a state where municipalities on the precipice of bankruptcy, public schools are poorly funded, and our infrastructure is crumbling. We just can't be competitive. So, as you know, I've said this a million times, pension reform saved $4 billion. That's $4 billion of averted property tax hikes and money that we can spend to build to make Rhode Island attractive. I also think, you see it now playing out in the federal issues, but businesses, small businesses, large businesses want an environment of predictability, and they want a place where government works. Every time there's a stalemate in Washington, the stock market tanks. On the flip side, when we pass pension reform, Rhode Island's stock increased because there's confidence that we can get things done, we can fix problems, we can fix really challenging problems. When businesses see that, they say, hey, that government's working. I want to be there. So, it's a fundamental issue. And by the way, I think, I may have said this to you downstairs, I love the title of this series, Reinvent Rhode Island. I think marginal improvement is not going to get us anywhere. When you're sitting at the second highest unemployment in the country, nearly 11%, and in fact much higher than that, public schools, which are not among the top in the country, we sit right next door to Massachusetts, with half of our unemployment rate and some of the best public schools in the country. It's go time. It is big change time, big thinking time. And what we did with the pension, that was not a small reform. That was not a let's just get rid of the COLA, let's just raise the retirement age a little and get rid of the COLA. That was a fundamental redo. People said it's not possible, but it was possible. And so that's the way forward, I think, for this state. And if to commit to anything less than that kind of big change, I think is a mistake. I actually see Rhode Island as, I worry that people are giving up. People are saying, can it ever be fixed? Maybe I'll just move. And so my message is don't give up. This is time to dig in. If you're a business owner, recommit yourself to Rhode Island. If you are a politician, recommit yourself to Rhode Island. If you're a school teacher or a student, or this is it. This is our moment to get in the boat and come together and make some big changes. Put politics aside, just like the pension. Just forget about politics. This is it. We're going to go big or go home. Because if we don't, we're going to be left behind. Not just being left behind Massachusetts. We're now competing with India and China and Brazil and every place else. So, I think we can do it.
Why are we the poor stepbrother to Massachusetts?
I think we lack for a plan. They made some key strategic. They used to be Taxachusetts. It wasn't that long ago that they were Taxachusetts. Now all of a sudden they're vibrant economy. Some of it is they have, as they say, meds and eds. We don't have Harvard and MIT and Harvard Medical School in the partner system. That's just a fact. But they have a very engaged business sector, extremely engaged business sector. They've had some very thoughtful leaders in government, and they have focused. They've put a lot of time and attention into reforming their public schools. They've put a lot of money and time into making UMass a great place.